Hi everyone and welcome to this week's video. As you can see behind me, we are very cold again and we have more snow. So temperatures down to -5, -6 last night, and it's bitterly cold this morning doing the dog walk and the school run. So I thought this week, since we can't be out in the garden weeding or mulching the beds, working on that, instead we'll go back and we'll have a look at 2022 and all the things that happened, all the different weather that we had and how it affected the flowers and what worked really well, what didn't work well. And this is a really nice way of me showing you some of the flowers, but it's also a really nice way for me to look back and just get a good idea of what happened last year so that I can use it in my growing plan for the coming one. So sit back and enjoy some really pretty pictures of my flowers, have a look at the seedlings that I grew last year, have a look at the different kinds of weather that we got, and from that we'll go forwards into 2023 with a much better idea of what we want to do. So January at Cloudberry Flowers is often a very quiet time. It's the quietest month of the year for me, and I generally do a lot of planning here, go through all my seeds and check which ones I've got and which ones I might need to reorder in, but I don't start any sowing at this time of year. We've only got about 8 hours of daylight, and it's always better to wait until we've got a little bit more, about 10 hours of daylight before starting off seeds. And also we tend to get a lot of our worst weather at this time of year, so it's kind of hunkering down, waiting for better weather and making lots of good growing plans for the season ahead. When we get to February, that's when I start to think about seed sowing, and it's also when I am starting to look at maybe on the nicer days hardening off some of those autumn sown hardy annuals. Last year I was really lucky. It was fairly mild over the winter time. We didn't really get these very low temperatures that we're getting this year. So my hardy annuals I sowed in the autumn made it through the winter. For the first time I managed to get Magus through the winter, which was fantastic. I managed to get scabious through for the first time. My reliable corn cockles and cornflowers, they came through. So I had lots and lots of early potential flowers for this spring. It's very exciting when you can get autumn sown ones through the winter time because you know they're going to flower earlier for you than if you'd sown them in the winter, and they are going to be much bigger, stronger plants with better flowers. What kind of seeds do I start off in February time? Well, they're always the hardy annuals that can deal with a little bit of cool weather when I plant them out. So things like Gypsophila or Leah, cornflowers, corn cockles, scabious, they get started off early. The things that I leave in February are things like my half-hardy ones, things like my cosmos and my zinnias and my sunflowers. I leave them till later to sow. Also in February I might start off some perennials to see if I can get them flowering for the first time in the year. Things like feverfew I might start off, and achillea. They're always good ones as well. And sometimes I also do another sowing of stalks to see if I can get some flowers. They're a biennial, so you can also sow them in June for earlier flowers the following year. But I do start some off in February too. In February I start seeds off on the heated propagating bench just to give some bottom heat to the seed trays, and that just helps with germination. When I start off seeds later in the year I don't need this bottom heat because the weather is warmed up by then, but in February it's a big help. March, there's still lots and lots of seed sowing going on, lots of hardy annuals I'm getting in still, but also a lot of potting on happening because of the ones that have germinated from the February sowings are now ready to get put into bigger pots. So an awful lot of potting on happens, and then these can grow on happily in the greenhouse for a few more weeks before they're hardened off and go outside. So March is extremely busy. It's probably one of the busiest times in the year because you're also weeding and getting beds ready outside for planting into. I start to harden off again on nice days, so these Nigella things are outside hardening off, you can see just now. And then last year tulips were coming up fantastically in March. It was really exciting to see them all, and I'd had a bad few years of tulips before then. I'd got tulip fire and the weather hadn't been good, so it was nice to see these coming up looking nice and healthy. Although it's fairly cold still, hardy annuals can cope outside, and these ones had been out in the ground all winter long. So these are corn cockles and cornflowers, poppies and stalks, and they were starting to grow away quite happily now that we were getting a little bit more light and a little bit more warmth on some days. On the cooler days it could be covered over fleece if I really needed to, but they were starting to grow away nicely and looking good. The hellebores were also looking good in the garden, one of my favourite flowers. And we had some irises coming up in pots too. Mid-March, I was able to have some baskets of flowers on the stall. These were primroses I've been growing and irises and crocuses that I could pot up into baskets. In February, I pre-sprouted some more ranunculus and anemones, and these were thriving, doing really well in a greenhouse in March, not far off ready to be planted out once they were hardened off. Sweet peas were looking really healthy as well and ready to get hardened off and get planted outside. I had trialled growing sweet peas completely in the greenhouse and flowering in there the year before, but I had found actually that I didn't really get much better flowers in there, and actually the ones in the garden really weren't that far behind. So I've just decided to stick to growing them outside up against their canes and netting and leave it growing in the greenhouse, so I've got more space for seedlings in there. Mother's Day was the end of March last year, and it's always a tricky one for me because Mother's Day comes early in the UK, usually before any flowers are out in the garden. So what I like to do is I like to pot up baskets and force bulbs over the winter time that I can use in these, and I also have my homemade jewellery that I sell, and I have my flower cards too. And if I'm very lucky, I might have the odd flower that has come out early. So I had some stocks in jars and some narcissi that had come out early in the greenhouse, but definitely nothing at this time of year in the flower fields. So throughout February and March, we'd had quite a lot of temperatures overnight that were dipping below freezing, and it felt quite cold throughout the days, so I hadn't planted anything out in the garden yet. I've been hardening off, but hadn't risked putting it out just because of the ground was still very cold. You can feel with the back of your hand that soil hadn't warmed up, and we were even getting some snow and quite wild weather as well. And when the weather is wild, that's when it's difficult to have those low caterpillar tunnels and fleece on, because it just gets lifted and sometimes quite damaged, and then I can't use it again. So it was a slow spring start with very few flowers going into April. As a result, those first couple of weeks in April, we had quite a backlog of little seedlings in the greenhouse, all waiting to go out. Some getting hardened off, some just waiting for that better weather. Hopefully that was going to come later on in the spring. Third week in April and warm at last. It had been a really long wait to get flowers this year, but suddenly a little bit of warmth and they all come out at once. So you have tulips popping here, there and everywhere. You're cutting and harvesting tulips several times a day, and you're having to store them. So they went into the cold garage. You can pull tulips up whole with the bulbs still attached and lie them in cold storage in the dry, and then cut the bulbs off and rehydrate them when you want to use them. So that's quite useful. So by the end of April last year, it was all of a sudden from going from no flowers to being able to make bouquets again, which was really exciting, to having my first weddings of the year. The flowers came out just in time for that. So we had a gorgeous white themed wedding first with nice greeneries and lovely hellebores in the bouquets and buttonholes. And then I was able to do some tulip buckets for florists as wholesale flowers, so that was really exciting as well. And get my garden gate stall back up and running with some nice flower jars and bunches of tulips on it. Outside in the flower patches, the narcissi were starting to look absolutely gorgeous, just like the tulips. They are all starting to all come out at once after that cold spell, bit of heat and off they go. A lot of my narcissi are in the third flower patch, and they're fenced off from the rabbits, because even though rabbits are not supposed to like narcissi, they do seem to like nibbling mine for some reason, so they've been fenced off to protect them. But what happened is that I have planted so many narcissi that they're not in rows anymore, they're in a mass area. And then I tried to turn this into wildflower meadow on top of this, but it just hadn't really worked. So what I wanted to do was to rescue this flower patch this year and turn it back into rows and beds and paths, so that I can utilise it more easily at other times of the year, not just when the narcissi are there. And so that's been a big job this autumn, trying to take all the bulbs out and to replant them in the lawn in the garden instead. And we're just going to risk the rabbits because there's so many narcissi now. I don't think the rabbits can have all of them, but then use that third flower patch for actual bed space for hardy annuals. So the end of April was another lovely wedding that I was able to do, and the bridal bouquet for this was just so nice to make because it had so many of my favourite spring flowers in it. So we had scented stalks and we had fringed tulips and beautiful hellebores, and I was able to use spirea bridal wreath in it as well, and some lovely pastel tulips. And hellebores are fantastic hues in buttonholes and in bouquets, but you have to pick them at the right stage. So you have to pick them when they're mature and the seed pods have formed. Cut them too early in their maturity and they'll just wilt. As well as weddings at the end of April, I was full of florist orders, so many lovely buckets of tulips and hellebores and narcissi that I could provide for local florists, and they're scented as well. I love the narcissi for their scent. Garden Gate stall was full of bunches of flowers, and I was able to make up jar orders and also anniversary bouquets as well. So because we'd had a really cold early spring through March and the early stages of April, I got a bit behind in getting some of my more tender annuals growing, and that's things like my sunflowers and my zinnias and my cosmos. And these were definitely sown in May at the beginning because the weather just hadn't been good enough, and I'd got behind and was tulip picking so much by the end of April that I'd missed this opportunity. So I would say that these tender annuals I started off a little bit later than I usually would. Normally I would start them off in the last couple of weeks of April. There were just so many beautiful flowers in May. I just loved making up every jar arrangement or bouquet that I was asked to do. The tulips were just keeping on coming again, still 4 or 5 times a day, picking them as they came out in any sunny weather that we had. And then we were starting to get anemones as well, the first perennial cornflowers, hesperus, honesty, bluebells, as well as the end of the narcissi. So lots and lots of lovely flowers to work with, and still able to use some of those hellebores as well that were now mature and good enough to use in a vase or an arrangement. Lots of buckets of flowers still going out to the florists in different colour schemes that they wanted to have. By this stage, the greenhouse was absolutely packed to the gunnels and really needing everything to be planted out into the garden. Having weddings at the end of April, being later sowing my tender annual seeds and later hardening things off meant that we were needing to be full steam ahead to get all these things in the ground outside. Third week in May, we still had tulips, which was really nice. Lots of my fringed ones coming out, so they're slightly later ones, the fringed ones, and the parrots as well for me come out later as well. So lots of lovely ones to work with. And also the pheasant's eye narcissi coming out in the garden. They're the last of the narcissi for me to flower. And another wedding in May. It's really exciting to then start to be able to use some of the perennial flowers in the garden as well as those gorgeous ranunculus. And this was definitely the best year for ranunculus that I've ever had in the garden, 2022. It was fantastic, and it was really exciting to see them all flowering in mid to late May. So sadly, in May, my granny died, and she was in her late 90s and had had a really wonderful life, but it was really an honour to be able to do the flowers for her funeral, and I was able to go around the garden choosing all the favourite ones in bloom that week, and I was able to use the ranunculus floropleno and some lovely alliums and some aquilegia and beautiful different foliages from the garden, and some ravenswing, which is another favourite of mine, and phacelia. So many lovely Mayflowers, so I'm hoping she would have liked it. Another big wedding was at the end of May, and this one was a lot of DIY buckets, and this was a really tricky wedding to pick for because we had gale force winds at the time, and winds are not making it easy to cut flowers and for them not to be damaged. But we managed really well, and there were so many beautiful ranunculus and alliums and lupins and hesperus and ranunculus floropleno, so many beautiful flowers that they could use to decorate the teepee. And then I made some buttonholes and some wrist corsages as well. So end of May we had the alliums out, which was great. We also had out the camassia, and we had out the beautiful Chirophyllum hirsutum roseum, which is a lovely filler. The ranunculus were getting really amazing by this stage. Best ranunculus I've ever had, which is why I'm so disappointed this year that they are not making it through the freezing temperatures in the winter, because I was hoping to see them again. We were starting to get the first annuals flowering, so we were getting the first cornflowers, which was exciting. Got the first buds on the nigella as well, not quite flowering yet, and we got the first gypsophila flowers. So these were all autumn sown hardy annuals that were flowering at the very end of May. And also we got the phacelia that was autumn sown that was flowering too. Phacelia is one of my favourite cut flowers. It's just really unusual. So June on the Garden Gate stall, there were lots of lovely flowers to use. We've got hesperus for a bit of scent. We've got lots of lovely ranunculus. We're mixing them in with the first annuals now. So lots and lots of colourful jars I was able to have. We even got some poppies flowering. That's a lovely red one here in time for Beltane. We had ranunculus floropleno, which is one of my favourite perennials to come up every year in June. Then I had a lovely wedding in June to do and used some really beautiful purple and pinks and whites in this, ranunculuses, hesperus, alliums, lots of lovely flowers there. As well as the weddings, there were orders for jar arrangements and also buttonholes for just people going to a wedding and just wanted to take along their own buttonhole or corsages. And every jar is different when I make them because all the flowers are constantly changing in the garden. By the second week in June, there was lots of lovely flowers for florists. There was first irises, first sweet peas, more ranunculus. The nigella was flowering. We had lupins. So many lovely flowers for a local florist to work with. And then we had the cornflowers really starting to come out. We had the corn cockles coming out as well, and Orlea. And we got the nigella as well. So all these annuals that had been grown in the autumn were really coming out by the beginning of June. Maybe a little slower than we would have liked because of that cold spring, but when we got some heat, they really started to get going. And they're always bigger flowers, better, stronger, taller plants. Got some snapdragons as well that started to come out. Lots and lots more Phacelia. The Gypsophila Covent Garden was the best I'd ever had, and that was from a sowing from autumn last year. At this stage in June as well, it's starting to get towards the end of term and lots of teachers like to get presents, and it's quite nice for local children to be able to come past the stall and pick up a jar of flowers for their teacher. There's always so many beautiful flowers that can go in them, really good mixtures of annuals at that time of year. And in the garden we've got so many lovely irises and gladioli starting to come out, beautiful sweet peas for florists, and lots of lovely little bouquets that can be made for customers. So many different colour schemes as well, blues and purples, or you can have pinks, or you can have just whites. This is when it's a real pleasure to work with flowers because there's so much to choose from in the garden. Florist buckets towards the end of June, full of those cornflowers, the first feverfew, the first astrantia, more gypsophila, tons of sweet peas, some daisies coming now too. It was towards the end of June last year that we got the first Daucus and the first Amimagus, which were autumn sowings from the previous year, but they were well worth waiting for because the size of the plants was unbelievable. The Amimagus was way over my head. I think it must have been a good 6 feet tall. Really huge, big flowers on them. And the later sowings of Amimagus that I did in the late winter, early spring, the plants were just not nearly as abundant and really full of strong, big flowers and long, tall stems as those autumn ones were. They were just amazing. Unfortunately, this year the cold spell has meant that the Ami didn't survive, but we'll have another shot next year at it and hope for a milder winter. By the end of June, the snapdragons were doing really well. They're a little bit slower to get started. They take a long time to grow from seed for me. It seems to be a long time period between sowing and flowering. The saponaria was doing really well, and this was a great filler for bouquets. The nigella was hitting its stride. These were all from sowings directly into the ground in the autumn, so they had had no protection over the winter at all, and they flowered really, really well for me at the end of June. Cornflowers are really getting going in June, and as you can see if you look closely here, there's quite a few that are starting to go over. You really have to keep cutting them like sweet peas and cut them back hard so that you get some nice long stems for new flowers coming through. They can be quite difficult to cut because there's just so many wiry stems, especially through netting, but they are very pretty. Lots of lovely astrantia coming out in the garden, one of my favourite ever perennials. Lots of nice colours, pinks, dark ones, light ones, white ones, and these are great for florists to use in bouquets. Outside, the sunflowers were now planted out with some Orlea in between them flowering. Sweet peas were out. Nice red flowers for our local Beltane festival, which is red and white in its traditional colours. And then lots more bouquets getting made for bouquet orders. And more buckets of flowers, and lots of lovely large jars of flowers as well, so people can choose what they would like. And nice eryngium coming out and thistles in the buckets. Those very last flowers in June are all those teacher thank you presents in lovely little jars for them to take home, so I hope the teachers like getting them from the children. July, I always breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, really, because by that stage I've got everything planted out. The dahlias are in the ground and they've been growing away for a month, and we've got all the annuals and things planted out. Seed sowing is slowing down. I've done some biennial seed sowing, and I can just enjoy the flowers and enjoy the orders as they come in. Lots of bouquets, lots of flowers on the stall, lots and lots of sweet peas to cut at this stage before the stems start to shorten and can't use them anymore. So it's lovely to go out and cut them all the time. And so many beautiful flowers for florists. Feverfew coming into its own, Achillea, lots and lots of Amimagus and Daucus, lots and lots of Astrantia as well coming out in the buckets. So July is an exciting time to be a flower farmer because there's just so many beautiful flowers out there. And then it gets exciting in the garden because you get those first dahlias flowering, which are always exciting to see, and the first alstroemeria as well. By this time, the Achillea was hitting its stride. Florists were still asking for lots and lots of lovely buckets, and every week was something different for them. I love doing mixed buckets where you can provide them with some nice surprises to use. And some weeks it's whites and blues, some it's reds and pinks and purples. At this time of year, it's a lot of whites, blues, pinks and purples before the autumn colours come out. By mid-July, you're starting to see those first sunflowers, which is always exciting, and make up some really nice, bright, cheerful jars of flowers and little jars of sweet peas for the stall. Lots of DIY buckets were going out in July with Achillea the Pearl featuring, and phlox, annual phlox, that's another beautiful one, and hare's tail bunny grass. Lots of lovely, lovely flowers going out. Linaria canon went there as well, more eryngiums. And then you start to be able to make all these bouquets with those dahlias in them, which is always really exciting. Every bouquet is different, so you're never going to get the same one twice. Everything's going to be a surprise for the person receiving it. By the time you get to the end of July, the sweet peas are starting to get shorter in stem length, but you can still make them into lovely little vases on the stall. Larkspur is starting to come out in the garden now, and also you're getting the perennial phlox too, which is beautiful. And lots more sunflowers as well coming out, and that Astilbe. I grow the Pro-Cut series of sunflowers, so we've got Pro-Cut Plum, Pro-Cut Orange, and also Pro-Cut White Knight, and they worked really well last year. Really good, nice, strong stems, and if you plant them fairly close together, you get smaller sized heads, which is useful for bouquets. And we're continuing to get more orders in for lots of nice flowers for people. We were away for a couple of weeks on a family holiday at the end of July, beginning of August, and when I came back you can really see the colour changes starting to happen in the garden. Starting to get some lovely Apricotta Cosmos, which was a new one for last year, which I absolutely loved. Some Rebecca Cherry Brandy as well. These are all warm colours coming in, but still lots of your pinks and purples throughout August and September too. By the time you're into August, you're not getting just a few stems of dahlias. They're really starting to really come out, and also the sunflowers as well, really keeping going throughout August. So bouquet combinations at this time of year start to become dahlias and daucus and cosmos and scabious and status. These are all things that I would put in my August and September bouquets. And then we got into having our last wedding. This was the last one that I have committed to doing at the moment while I take a break from weddings, and it was lovely to do this last one. Really nice, lots and lots of flowers going out for the tables and bouquets. It was a pleasure to do. I can't make up my mind whether I love pinks and blues and whites and purples in flowers more, or whether I love these lovely richer shades of autumn. I think I love them as they come round. So in June time, I love all the lighter colours, and then by autumn, I really enjoy these darker shades. I mean, the Rebecca Cherry Brandy is just absolutely gorgeous, and the Apricotta Cosmos, beautiful. But you can still have your pink ones too. So getting into September this year, we had lots of lovely roses, second flush, we had dahlias, we had some nice asters, although slightly short-stemmed, some scabious. The scabious and cosmos were really not good last year. I got some stems, but not nearly as much as I would have liked. And I don't know whether that was the drying conditions that we had that with winds and things in June that just caused some problems there. I think a bit more moisture might have helped them to grow stronger. By late September, you're starting to get the asters coming out, which is lovely. And you never know whether you're going to get a first frost around this time and you're going to lose the dahlias. But this year we didn't have any September frosts, which was really good. So we could keep on providing flowers for everyone. And lots of orders were still coming in. Chrysanthemums were starting to come out now, which was nice as well. As you get towards the end of September, the flowers are still absolutely stunning, but they are starting to slow down in number, and you're starting to be able to look towards tidying the garden up a little bit in some beds where they finish flowering. So for instance, I was starting to do a major overhaul of where the narcissi was, so digging up the narcissi, getting them into the lawn, starting to create paths, and also just putting my builder's black polythene over the beds to start getting rid of some of the weeds there as well. And this is going to be an ongoing project throughout next year too. The weather is still kind enough in late September to still have the garden gate stall full of flowers. Sometimes if it's a really wild, windy, wet day, I won't put them out, but most days are fine enough for people to be able to pop by for their local flowers if they would like them. Late September as well, you're starting to have to be able to tell the florists that there will be flowers hopefully, but not guaranteed every week because we never know when that first frost's going to come. But last September we were able to keep providing the flowers and some lovely foliage at this time of year as well, as it starts to turn in colour and you get some lovely browns and reds and oranges coming out that you can supply florists with, and the most amazing dahlias too. My favourite new dahlia from last year was Henrietta, which you can see there, and it was a fabulous flower. Definitely a top favourite for growing on again. And that's Fides carpus you can see in the background there with the darker leaves, fantastic for using in bouquets too. And those bright blue asters, fantastic. Getting into October, things are slowing down, so I started to make some more flower jewellery. I started to make something new this year, which was my flower cufflinks. And if you would ever like to browse through my jewellery, it's on my website, and I make earrings and necklaces, cufflinks and brooches. The flowers were still going strong. We had some lovely chrysanthemums and dahlias, and the zinnias finally started flowering in October, just when my season's finishing. So I was able to get a few, but those definitely needed planted earlier than I had them going. I think that I need to start them off in April really to get some good flowers, not in May. October as well, I had pre-sprouted all those lovely ranunculus. They were looking fabulous, filling the greenhouse up and growing away really nicely. Outside, it was time to start clearing those beds so I could get some tulips in November. So November came and it was tulip planting time. Amazingly, the flowers were still going. We still hadn't had a bad enough frost to get rid of the dahlias, but the days were numbered. And by the 6th of November, that was the first frost that took out the dahlias. But compared to previous years where I've had it in September, we really were very lucky this year. Once the dahlias have had a frost, that's them taken out. And then you can start clearing the beds for putting the tulips in. But we started to enjoy some lovely autumn walks and time in the garden with Hattie playing with the leaves. And then that was it. That first week in November, the last bouquet made of the year, and a lovely one it was too. And then it was into December and making the Christmas wreaths for my local customers. The same ones come back every year wanting a Cloudberry Flowers wreath on their door, and it's really nice to make them up using foliage from the garden and moss that I rake up as well to make a moss base for them. And I sell lots of other things in the greenhouse as well, potpourri and sparkly alliums I've grown, and my jewellery as well. And it was all going so well at the beginning of December. We were able to have the greenhouse open as a shop and people could come and browse for their Christmas presents. Didn't know what was going to happen a week later. And the narcissi paperwhites were starting to come out as well, and the amaryllis that we'd grown. And then we suddenly started to get some snow and some ice, and it looked like it was going to be okay to begin with, and I put some frost cloth over the plants in the greenhouse, but then it just kept getting colder and colder and colder until we were getting minus 15 degrees overnight, and it was only getting up to minus 8 in the daytime. And by that time the greenhouse had frozen solid shut and weren't able to get in there to rescue any plants, and no longer able to have my Christmas greenhouse shop, so everything kind of came to a halt then. The best thing to do was just to get out and have some beautiful walks with Hattie and wait for the big thaw, which did come midway through December. We had a couple of weeks and then the thaw came, unfortunately with some burst pipes as well, but luckily we managed to get that all fixed up, and for the last week before Christmas we were able to open up again, do some more wreaths and some Christmas shopping for everyone. So overall, in 2022, a lot of challenges with very late spring after the cool weather, but the tulips and the narcissi and the ranunculus that followed were fantastic. Very dry, windy spell in the early summer, which meant that the soil was quite dried out for growing on those annuals such as cosmos and scabious, so they didn't fare so well. But then a really mild autumn, we did great there, got flowers for a long time. And then just that bit at the end where it took all the autumn sow and hardy annuals in the very cold spell. So flower farming, it's a challenge. You're always going to face different weather conditions, but you still, because you have that love of flowers and love of gardening, you just get on with it every year. You take what the weather gives you and you run with it, and you really, really enjoy growing those flowers and seeing what amazing ones you can grow in your particular conditions in your particular garden. So thanks very much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed looking at all those lovely flowers. I certainly enjoyed putting it together because it's really nice to look back at what you managed to grow and all the successes that you had, and also having a look at some things that didn't work so well. So now I have a really good idea what I want to do in 2023, and I hope you'll follow me along on my journey this year with my weekly videos. Hopefully we'll get one out every week, sometimes more if there's lots going on in the growing season. And do please subscribe if you haven't done so already. That'll just keep you up to date with when new videos are coming out. And I love having all your comments and your emails. It's great to be in touch with you and find out how you are getting on in your flower farms and your gardens back at home.